Page 168. Ohtli, Necuapalli. One time, while teaching us about keeping our energy layers tight, Don McCord spoke of something that in the language of the healers meant shredding the basic components, and could be translated as genetic recapitulation. The only way to revitalize our congenital energy and put it entirely at the disposal for our awareness was by compacting it, he said. To achieve this, it was first necessary to scrutinize it from the base up. I remember that Carlos had touched upon the topic in one of his talks. He said it was essential to know our energetic potential, and that it was therefore necessary to investigate our origins by discovering how our parents had made us. In one of his public lectures in which I assisted, he said, "By finding out what mood our parents were in at the time of our conception, we can say for certain whether the act that brought us to this world was infiltrated by ethical or religious concerns. Through meticulous scrutiny, it is possible to find out whether or not there was passion. Without passion, the act was mediocre and lacked the necessary strength." Carlos classified himself as the product of a bored fuck. He told us that because of our socialization, very few people had in fact issued from passionate relationships. Because of that, his teacher advised him to be very cautious with the use of his energy and said in his case, all excesses were strictly forbidden. Don Genaro used to tease him, saying that his chili was just for urinating, and he was allowed to give it only 2 shakes after peeing, because the third one for him would count as masturbation. It was Carlos' custom to illustrate his teachings with jokes and funny comments. Once, when the topic of sex was being discussed, he told us that until recently, the Spanish did not even undress during sexual intercourse. The idea that it was a sin was so strong that, to rid themselves of the guilt for participating in so sinful act, they would kneel beside the bed and in their prayers repeat the refrain. Not advice, not because it's nice, but to place a song in thou service. Carlos had spoken the invocation with an exaggerated Castilian accent, which provoked a wave of laughter in the audience. He then added more seriously, "It's easy to predict the energy level of the creature that is being created in that kind of relationship." He added that in our case, it was possible to determine how we were made in 2 ways: by directly asking our parents, or by using a specialized form of recapitulation, of which he gave no details on that occasion. Answering a question, he said, "A good recapitulation has no limits. It can take you back to the moment of your birth and beyond. Since for couples, sexual intercourse often turns into a mandatory event, which must be performed regardless, it tends to become an ordinary, boring act in which the fire of passion has died, leaving daily routine in its place. The ones who pay the greatest price for this transformation are the children, born with an energy level so low that they are like old people from the day they are born. That is why Carlos once said of one person in the group that he was fortunate to have been a bastard. He explained that in that type of relationship, there was at least a chance of there being enough passion during the act of procreation. It was doubtlessly due to this that the energy level of this person in question was higher than normal. The healer's tradition also uses those concepts. One of the speakers once commented on an extract from the Bible which said, "To enter the kingdom of heaven meant to be born a second time." Don Malcor later explained what the passage was about and confirmed that it contained a great truth. He said, "It's not a metaphor, but a literal truth. If we manage to unravel the events of our lives and arrive at the rudimental vibration which created us, the possibility of performing an energy miracle will open to us. By returning to our origins, we can compact the energy involved in that initial act of creation and in that way rescue our integrity." Sorcerers take recapitulation seriously because it not only helps one get rid of the burdens imposed upon us by daily life, it can also reverse the stigma of the original sin, which is to be born without energy. That is how retracting the path helps us in a very profound way, affecting changes at the fundamental level. We are not only what we consciously and unconsciously decree. At birth, we acquire the heritage from the generations that preceded us. By recapitulating and canceling undesirable commands, it is possible to modify our basic structure and shape our characters at will. It is the only way we can rid ourselves of unconscious repetitions, the only way we can prevent the onslaught of diseases and other conditions that may have been programmed into the heritage we got from our ancestors. Only by returning to our origins can we correct any fault that may have been there at the moment of our formation. This is achieved by breaking the basic components of our character down to their minimum expression. The warrior then uses intent to reconsolidate himself as a whole, now free of external commands. Although the revision of basic components as such has no power to cancel out our parents' act, it does help restore our totality as luminous beings. For sorcerers, constructing their energy body is a work of art that usually takes a lifetime to complete. That is why they are so meticulous about anything relating to that goal. I asked Don Malcor how it was possible to recapitulate something that happened before we even existed. He replied, "The memory we use in our daily lives is cerebral. Here, however, the type of recollection sorcerers seek has to do with our origins, when we did not have a description of the world around us. To be sure, our basic components, or the energy fibers that make us up, obviously had to be present at the moment of our creation. Those fibers recorded it all." Along the same line of thought, he clarified, "I'm not referring only to the physical aspects of our birth, but to the exact moment of our formation as units of luminosity. I am talking about luminous fibers, where the fusion of two segments in a given moment produces the spark of individual awareness. To our luminous body, the passage of time means nothing. So much so that it's perfectly capable of activating those very same filaments that were employed at the exact moment of our creation. That is the warrior's feat. Achieving it, one might even get to perceive oneself as one really is, a fiber of light, aware of itself. Every human being's potential includes all the capacities of a warrior. It's just a matter of activating them. Everything begins with an initial act of will. If we then faithfully continue reviewing our actions, we successfully revive our link with the spirit. A warrior, then, is someone who has literally been reborn, or rather, someone who has recreated himself and has been conceived anew, only this time fully, passionately, and free from the fetters of socialization. The complete history of our ancestors is stored in our basic components. Retrieving that history is an act of power through which we definitively disintegrate the illusion of I. That history is not composed of words of images, although it is entirely possible to realign with any of them in order to make it the return journey. Continuing with his explanation, Don Melchior clarified the point. The memories we usually access during our genetic recapitulation are in fact impressions that jolt the totality of our fibers, making us aware of why we are as we are and why we react as we habitually do. Genetic recapitulation brings us into contact with the immense burden we carry, imprinted in us as the heritage from our ancestors. As a result of this type of recapitulation, we introduced ourselves to a unique dimension where sensations hold a priority over the mind, making it possible for us to perceive the forces acting upon us. Every aware being in the universe is connected to a particular luminous fiber. The act of focusing on one of these lines is called aligning. To align, therefore, means to live a particular experience, past or present, contained in the vast ocean of awareness. One participant asked what the object of the exercise was, because it was bound to be hard work. Don Melchior replied, "You cannot evaluate the results of that effort unless you personally commit to it. Anyone can understand the practical results of that work are of enormous importance because it has to do with the reason for our existence, keeping the flame of awareness alight. Every living being in the universe is fighting for the same thing, whether they know it or not. It is like a cosmic game where only those who manage to pass each evolution stage can progress. Recapitulation should be the main task of our life. One can't know what one is missing if one's never had a point of comparison. People have no idea how the transmission of the basic components affect them, and are therefore constantly exposed. Explaining the transmission of our personal characteristics by means of basic components, Don Melchior said this phenomenon occurred not only vertically in the transmission from parents to children, but also horizontally through other mechanisms of contact. The way in which the presence of others affect us is a good example of this. He said that was why the saying, "Tell me who your friends are and I will tell you who you are," was indisputably true. When our energy interacts with that of others, we receive something from them and the other way around. That exchange of filaments is what needs to be reset, and only a good recapitulation can do it. That is why warriors go to extremes to save energy, by strictly avoiding taking part in activities that might drain their personal power. He gave the way of sorcerers interacted with ordinary people as example. One can only deal with mundane people through acting, by dodging them to avoid being ensnared in their coils. What Akalos called the act of stalking, the healers called the act of acting. Don Melchior said in acting with the people they were healing, the healers ran a calculated risk. It is therefore common for them to disappear from time to time to retrace their steps. Consequently, whenever it was difficult to find someone in the group at a given moment, everyone would know he or she had retired and under no circumstances was to be disturbed. That's how they refer to someone who was busy recapitulating. Don Melchior commented, "That is the only way one can stay on top of things, otherwise you sink under the pressure of relationships and end up acting like ordinary people do. Such is the power of exchanging basic components." Someone wanted to know how it affected the relationship between parents and children. At the time of conception, Don Melchior explained, parents fused their energy. Each parent donated a life fiber of his or her own energy to form the new life. The miracle of conception consisted of trapping a handful of filaments of the energy at large inside a new luminous cocoon. That is how new life was formed. Following the creation of a new being, The energies of parents and children inevitably remain intermingled because each is part of the other. But recapitulation is very useful, even then, because it minimizes the loss of energy. He told us about a custom of Asians that was still observed in rural communities, that one never carried a child in front of one's body, but mounted on the hip or on one's back. Adults were very careful not to embrace the child frontally. That practice came from the sorcerers who knew that affection for children was in reality concern, and that parents were energetically drained through that feeling. Frontal embraces increased the drainage, which is why they opted for carrying the child strapped to the back or seated on the hip. It's also a favor to the little one, since it helps the child feel more independent and have self-confidence. It's all about saving every bit of energy possible. It is an effort similar to following a diet, and it is available to everyone. All one needs to do is to make a commitment to oneself. Unfortunately, as with the diet, the main factor is discipline. And as even the simplest decision to change requires an extra amount of energy, most people are not even fit to embark on such an undertaking. When people are told they need to reassess the aspects of their life which they are most attached to, they do an about turn and leave the issue for another day, saying, "What? Me? Stay single? Or me? Give up smoking? Nah, not anything but that." If we manage to solve the problem of energy, we will have made a huge step. We will have entered another world. But how many of us are willing to pay the price? I remember being assigned a very special exercise during our training. The exercise consisted of walking backwards while treading in our own footsteps with precision. At first, I thought it would be easy, but trying to do it, I realized it was much more difficult than I thought. The level of concentration and physical control required was extremely intense, and the execution had to be perfect. We spent months training before we were sufficiently skilled to do it. After a tiring day of practice, Don Melchor came over to us and explained the finer points of the exercise. It was, he said, a representation of the sorcerer's task called Ohtli Necuapalli, or retracting the steps. Smiling, he turned to me, his index finger in the air, and in a professional manner, as if expounding something very intellectual to his student, said, Colitus called it recapitulation. Everyone turned to me and laughed. Don Melchor continued with his explanation. Sorcerer healers also practice recapitulation, but we've added confessing our sins to grandfather fire to the technique. Also, in certain cases, one must undertake a return journey and return to the exact location where the recapitulated incident occurred, because there, with the help of correct breathing, one can recover one's soul. You may have heard healers make return journeys to retrace their steps. That is meant literally. They return to every place they passed through and where they left energy smears. They collect every crumb they may have left scattered along the way. The whole process requires a lot of preparation, as if getting ready to attend a very important event. The most important of all events, in fact, the recovery of the totality of oneself. The warrior then prepares for the return journey, and when he gets back to a place or meets people involved in the past events, he uses recovery techniques and calls back the energy he had left behind. How do we recover lost energy? What is the procedure? Someone asked. You have to use intent. Having got to the place where his energy was compromised, the warrior gets ready to draw on his reverting power. The procedure for recovering energy is to make our hands into claws and, inhaling gently or hard as appropriate, grab the emotions we injected into the place to get rid of any undesirable energy that may have been deposited in us there. One make a gesture of rejection, starting from the middle of the chest, and while doing that, exhale. In the case of recovering energy left in another person, all you have to do is touch them once with your left hand and once with your right to give back the energy that has been left in you. Is there a particular place on the other person's body that one should touch? In most cases, a simple squeeze of hand will do, but sometimes it's necessary to touch the chest of the other person. I was able to verify for myself the efficacy of those procedures and can say, to recapitulate in conjunction with the healer's practice of visiting the places where the events of one's life took place, greatly increase the power of ordinary recapitulation. In my particular case, I was able to see the results when I tried to retrace my steps on the subject of my family history. It was not until I had recovered every fiber of my energy that I could get the full measure of the value of this procedure. On another occasion, in a private conversation, Don Melchior told me, once we accept the challenge of being a warrior, the first thing we must do is retrace our steps, because that will give us the extra energy we'll need to start making our other changes. It is the only thing that can give an assistant in an understanding of what he's doing. If one tries to become a healer without recapitulating, one is lost in endless doubts and hesitations. After a moment of silence, he added, through recapitulation, one can even change appearance. What does that mean, Don Melchior? I'm saying that sorcerers can change their appearance at will. Don Habanito is an example. I'm mentioning it because you've often asked me how such transformation can be done. I can tell you now that everything starts with recapitulation. I told Doña Sylvia once that I was having difficulties with my recapitulation. To help me, she said, referring to her weaving. Our life is like this fabric. To retrace our steps, we must become aware of how our energy is interwoven. If one understands the tangle of one's life, it's much easier to unravel it. That day, she showed me a totally different recapitulation technique from the one I had been using so far. The system had no name, but I half jokingly called it recapitography because I had to write down the particulars of my recollection in detail on the bark of trees. The strips of bark were then exposed to the wind, after which they were ceremoniously burned, either privately or collectively. She says, retracing steps serves not only to resolve traumas, but also as a powerful technique for improving the quality of life. It is something everyone should do as a discipline. The benefits of that exercise include improved memory and becoming more aware of oneself and one's surroundings. We recover whatever was taken from us during energy attacks by people, as well as by nasty mountain winds. Along one of the regular routes we used on our walks, there was a tree the locals of the area believed to be magical. It was an enormous ceiba, about 40 meters high, considered by many to be the mother of all the ceibas in that valley. It was rumored to be very old, possibly 1,000 years or more. Stories of that tree power have even attracted pilgrims who had come from afar to drink from its life-giving fountain. From time to time, the healers would go there to fill their gourds with the blessed water. For sorcerers, however, the greatest gift that the tree gave them was none of the above, but rather its very fine bark, which they used for writing down the details of their personal recapitulation. On one of our visits to the tree, Danya Silvia told me, long ago, a powerful sorcerer chose this tree as his dwelling place and settled there to live in it. His spirit is still around. She suggested that I sit in the shade of the tree and verify its strength myself, and I did. Whether through the power of her suggestion or for some other reason, I really felt I was inside an unusually powerful field of awareness. While we were there, Doña Silvia spoke about the bark writing technique. She said, each ceiba tree is sacred to the Indians, not only for being the guardian of water and staying green all year round, but also because those trees shed their bark, which serves as a sort of paper for recording the events of their lives and their sins. It is, therefore, a sacred tree that helps us get rid of our crap. And that is exactly what you're going to do. You need to collect a lot of this tree's bark and write down all your life on it. So I collected a thick stack of sheets of bark on which I recorded all the incidents of my life that I could remember. I was amazed at the number of important things I had previously forgotten. Finally, when Danya Silva felt that my life had been sufficiently reviewed, she ordered me to ceremonially burn the sheets.